Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for the LPL Finals video. We just concluded the final series just a couple of hours ago, and it is time to overview and recap and give some analysis on what happened in the finals. The LPL playoffs have been a long and quite frankly very fun journey, a very good playoffs from the LPL this year, and it culminates in the series that I think we all wanted to see. So, before we jump into any of that, let me know down in the comment section below how you felt about the series or what you were expecting about the series going into it. Did it meet your expectations? Did it fall below your expectations? I find a lot of people are probably going to be saying that it was just about what they expected in a good way. It very much performed in the way that everybody would have wanted in the best way possible. But let me know how you feel about that down in the comments section below. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I don't want to waste too much of your time, so let's go ahead and get right into our LPL Finals matchup here between the 2-seeded winners bracket JD Gaming and the 1-seeded losers bracket Top Esports team. A very interesting matchup here. Obviously, we've already seen it in the playoffs. They played in winners finals and then Top beat up on Edward Gaming in order to get back here into grand finals. But these two teams were so evenly matched in their best of 5 that they played earlier this year already in the LPL final, or the winners finals, that it could go either way. Yes, JDG was able to win that, but don't forget, they went down 0-2 in that series. They lost the first 2 games and then reverse swept Top Esports. So a little bit more consistency out of TES, and I think it could be a different story here, but JDG does have the experience, and they do have the knowledge that they can beat Top Esports, but you know, they beat him in week 1, they beat him again here in winners finals. It's very difficult to beat a team like Top Esports 3 different times throughout the year in best ofs. So, it's definitely going to be an intriguing series that I am excited to watch. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let's get right into our game number 1. And game number 1 was a JD Gaming win. They pick up the game number 1 win, kind of continuing the momentum that they had in winners finals here. Obviously, it's the last series that they played. One thing to note here, Qingtian is in the top lane for Wayward. That won't last for much longer, but for some reason he started here in game number 1. I don't think Wayward was all that bad in the playoffs. They've been experimenting with top laners, and I honestly think Wayward has very much proven to be the better player by a considerable margin. And I think that continued here, but let's talk about what JD Gaming did right. Kanavi's just so freaking good, isn't he? Like, when you talk about carry junglers, there just aren't a lot in the world that I would take over Kanavi, who I think has consistently been one of the most highly prioritized and highly influential junglers in the entire world. And he proves it again here on the Wukong. This is a pick that he's gone to a lot over the course of this year, and it's pretty much always worked. He's going to get my player of the game here in game number 1. They were my key matchup, at least in the original series. Kind of keep that here for the finals of Kanavi and Tian. That was my key matchup. Obviously, Tian being the MVP of the LPL regular season. A very controversial MVP award because Knight on the same team was maybe just a little bit better. And I even put Kanavi as my first team all-pro jungler. So this was definitely an interesting matchup to kind of prove who the best jungler in the LPL was. Kanavi definitely gets round 1 here, and it's really not all that close. A really phenomenal early game from Kanavi that he's just able to transition. Now, it's not a bad early game from Top Esports, just kind of a meh early game from Top Esports. Kanavi's able to do a lot, able to get into on the map. Even if Top Esports did a really good job of being able to match that in terms of objectives, I think JDG still had a lot of the tempo in this game, and that was because of Kanavi. Want to give a big shout out to Hope as well for the back half of this game. Him and Missing, I think, both played really well in this one. Missing especially, but Hope positioned really well on the Zeri. Obviously outplayed Jackulove, which we will get to. But Zeri into Lucian can be relatively tough in the early game. Hope did his, he did his job. He sat back, he didn't die, he didn't make a ton of mistakes, and he got to the point in the game where he could do a lot of damage, and it was pretty safe. And a lot of the early game that he was protected in was a lot because of Missing. And Missing, we'll get to him throughout the series, but a really good game 1 from Missing. He's been very good throughout the playoffs, very consistent. Maybe not the standout player on JDG in any of these opportunities, but he's been ridiculously consistent as just a very solid support and someone who's very worthy of being here in the LPL finals. He's been playing really well. So yeah, Kanavi player of the game. I thought he played really well. Hope and Missing, definitely good as well. And then Yagao did his job on Lissandra. 369 did his job on the Kennen. He died a bit, but, you're going to die if you go full damage on Kennen. That's the 369 classic, so really can't complain too much there. Overall, a good game from JD Gaming. Not the most dominant win of all time. Mostly it was just off the back of Kanavi being really, really good and missing being able to keep everybody alive. But it's still a good win. Like, a win is a win, and especially against a team like Top Esports, the fact that, you don't have to, like, completely demolish them in order to, have it be a secure win. For Top, though, I just don't like how they come out here in game number 1. A very weird comp. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Vi, Lucian, Nami trio. I think it offers you very little options in the late game because Vi is obviously a more supportive piece. Lucian is, generally speaking, a more secondary AD carry towards the back half of the game, again, just because the range is bad. And I think you're setting yourself up when you're going into a Wukong, when you're going into a Zeri, hell, even something like a Kennen, to put yourself in a situation where you are really needing someone like a Jackie Love to completely take over the game. And that's kind of where we were at here. Knight played good, or well, I should say, in the mid lane on the Talia, but the rest of the team around him, not so much. Like I said, Xingtian, not good in the top lane. Not awful, but just not good. A poor game from him on the Gnar. He got beat by 369 in lane, and then didn't have nearly the same kind of impact towards the back half of the game. And then my dud of the game here, Jackie Love. Jackie Love in the bottom lane. You can talk about, how Lucian often has to put himself in danger to make a lot of these plays, but that doesn't often mean dashing into the enemy team and just dying immediately. Sometimes you get Jackie Love, sometimes you get Joker Love. Obviously, we've known this. I've talked about it all the time on this channel. Jackie Love, at his best, is the best AD carry maybe in the world, but, at his worst, he is not good. Like, he will actively lose you games by himself, and unfortunately, in game 1, this was a not good version of Jackie Love. He was actually in a pretty decent spot. Tion did invest a lot into the early game, into making sure Jackie Love had gold, and while he wasn't, like, ridiculously ahead, he at least was in a spot where he could do a lot of damage in the late game if he had the peel, but then he just ran it. He just threw the game towards the back half here and just made it very difficult for Top Esports to really even have a chance. So Jackie Love's gonna get my dud of the game here in game number 1. Tion wasn't all that good either. Like I said, got out jungled by Kanavi, but most of that was in the back half. They were kind of I would say they were relatively even for the most part over the first like 10 to 15 minutes of the game. Both of them making impacts in different parts of the game. Tion actually doing a good job of making sure objectives were on there, but Kanavi mostly just being fine with trading like a lot of dragons for heralds and things like that. So overall, I wouldn't say it was like an awful game from Top Esports, but certainly not one that you are super excited to kick off the series with. As for JDG, it's a good win. You're not going to complain too much. There are certainly things that you can clean up in this. I don't think it's like the most dominant win of all time. I think you need a little bit more early game pressure, but certainly you're going to like to start the series off a little bit better than you started off the last series. A lot less work to go into it to dominate the rest of the game. So what happened now in game number 2? We have JDG taking a strong 1-0 lead, continuing their momentum from Winners Finals. Can they continue that now in game number 2? Well, game number 2 was Top Esports, as they are able to bounce back here in game number 2 to tie up the series at 1-1. Now, this was a wild game. Like, this was actually an insane one that it's really difficult to explain because so much happened. Not only did it go 50 minutes, but it felt like it was close. It was close to the end. So we'll start off with the early game. The early game was actually pretty in Top Esports' favor. Tion did a good job here on the Poppy to be able to gain control of the map. Poppy has really been Tion's best pick throughout the majority of the year, and he gets back on it here in game number 2. He's able to create a lot in the mid lane here for Knight. This is a strategy that they went to a lot early in the season before they started realizing that they wanted to invest in Jackie Love and Mark just a tad bit more, and even in someone like Tion. They go back to Knight here on the Ahri, making sure that he's in a good spot, but they start to go away from it. They start to, play a little bit more passive, and you get to this point in the game where Hope starts getting gold in the bottom lane because Kanavi is investing in the Zeri with the Zeri Sivir handshake. And even though TES has a big early lead, JDG is clawing their way back into the game off of the back of the Zeri, the Lulu, and the Vi all having relatively good amounts of gold, and then the Talia being able to help out in plays like that, being able to contest for a lot of objectives, so on and so forth. JDG tries to claw their way back in, and actually they get to the point now where you're sitting at like 40 minutes, and Elder Dragon is spawned, and it's time to fight for Elder Dragon, and you're a little bit behind, but you've climbed your way back into this game, and you actually win the Elder Dragon fight. You get the Elder Dragon. You're like, great, that's phenomenal. let's go to Baron. Let's go get Baron. And they go to Baron, and we get a 5v5 at Baron. JDG, now not down 10k gold when they were winning fights earlier, are now up gold and have the Elder Dragon buff. And then TES wins the crucial Baron team fight to win the game. An absolutely unbelievable game, like back and forth. Really felt like, you know, and people are going to crucify me for this, really felt like a more NA style game than anything else. Because it really felt like nobody really wanted to keep the lead in this. And I'm not necessarily saying it was the winning team's fault both times, but you know, it's just kind of the ebb and flow of this game was very, very weird. Let's talk about Top Esports, because they did end up winning this game. They had a very good early game. Like I said, Tion did a really good job to maximize on a lot of the advantages that the Poppy can create in the early game, and to maximize on Knight's ability to, quite frankly, just outplay Yagao at points here. A really, really good game from Tion, but Knight is a pretty easy choice for player of the game for me. Not only was he a really impactful player in the early game for TES, a big reason why they got the early lead, but in that pivotal fight towards the back half of this game around Baron, like, and especially even just like in the last like 20 minutes of the game, I don't think he could miss a charm. Like, it feels point and click. I talk about this with Caps all the time in the LEC, where some people just play Ahri and that charm feels like a point and click ability. Knight is absolutely one of those players, and he dominated the back half of this game. He was doing so much damage, creating so much disruption. He was really, really solid. I think broadcast game player of the game to Wayward, who is back in the top lane here in game number 2, and I completely get it. Wayward comes back in. It is an immediate huge upgrade to what Jingtian was giving you in that top lane, but I just didn't feel like he had the same kind of like game-breaking impact that someone like Knight had in this one. Wayward still had a very, very good game, and clearly Top Esports is better for having him in the team, and they have been all year long. But Knight, I think, for my money, deserves the player of the game on the side of Top Esports here in game number 2. Like I said, Tion played well. Jackie Love and Mark were fine. They weren't really a focal point in this game. I definitely think game 1 soured them a little bit on maybe playing through that bottom lane with how Jackie Love was moving. And I certainly think that they were, while they were fine, they just, again, weren't a huge focal point. You draft the Leona here to be able to, quite frankly, leave lane, go play more with Tion, go play more with Knight, try to fight around objectives, you know, just get into that situation just a tad bit easier. And while it wasn't always perfect leaving Jackie Love on his own or even fighting in those objective situations, you end up with the right scenario, you end up with the right outcome, so how mad can you actually be? As for JD Gaming, oh, you had this one. Like this one was within your grasp, definitely. Like I said, bad early game. Honestly, you got out to a pretty bad start. Yagao was getting picked off in the mid lane here on the Taliyah, putting him behind and making him a lot less useful in those roams. That's a really good way to be able to stop Taliyah, is really just camp the shit out of her in the early, like, 4 to 8 minute time period, and then she's just not going to be that useful on a lot of these roams, especially in comparison to someone like an Ahri. So, it's a good strategy there, but Kanavi actually started playing a lot smarter. He realized that they weren't going to be playing around Jackie Love and Mark, and that Mark was going to be looking to leave a lot. And he started playing around Hope, making sure that Hope was getting in these fights and getting some gold. And Missing did a great job of accelerating that plan, I think, a lot. And we got to the point in the mid game where, honestly, like, even though they were down 5 to 10k gold, like, they were winning fights pretty consistently. And then you had the big one, an Elder that they were able to take, and then unfortunately they just weren't able to close it out when it mattered the most towards the back half of this game. But still a pretty close one for JDG. They were very, very close to going up 2-0 in this series, and then it would have been a different series entirely, that I can promise you. My dud of the game is going to go to 369 in the top lane on the Sion pick. I've talked about this in multiple regions. I just don't, I have yet to see Sion work in a pro setting. Like, I get what the idea of Sion is, but I have yet to see him work in the way that people want him to in any sort of competitive pro setting. You often see it into things like Olaf or Gnar or things like that, and I just, like, I get the idea, but it's not working, and I would expect teams to really start to move away from that pick. Clearly, it's working for some people in scrims because they keep pulling it out in multiple different regions. Like, it's not just one player or one region or whatever. It is clearly, like, people think that Sion is strong right now. I just have yet to see any of that in pro play up until this point. So, 369 is going to get my dud of the game for really not having any sort of impact, especially towards the back half here on that Sion. So, not all that great. And then Yagao, I think, definitely deserves an honorable mention for dud of the game, just for how he got kind of abused in the early game on that Taliyah. But he ended up making it worthwhile as he was able to make some plays around objectives to keep his team in the game. Overall, pretty close game between these two teams. Top Esports is going to feel pretty lucky to come out of this one with a win, but also they should feel like they deserved it because they really shouldn't have been in a spot where they gave up Elder in the first place. So, you know, they were both lucky and they deserved it. So take that with what you will. JDG kind of in that same boat, both unlucky and both they deserved the loss. They lost early game really hard, but they did a really good job to claw their way back to keep their mental on straight, which is something obviously this JD Gaming team, we know they do really, really well after that 0-2 start in the series prior. So now that we're tied up at 1-1, we're basically going to a regular season best of 3 to determine the LPL champion. And really, I think both teams could take it. Like I said, this is one of the most evenly matched series I think you could have in the playoffs, and so it's going to be really interesting to see which team can put themselves in an advantageous position here in game number 3. Winning game 3 is huge in a 1-1 series. Going up 2-1 gives you a huge buffer, because not obviously now game 4 becomes important, but not win or must, win or go home, right? Must win. So who is going to be able to take game 3 and set themselves up in a much better spot in this series? It is going to be JD Gaming is able to take game 3 here in a pretty close game, but honestly, JDG was better here. And this was the first game, I think, that really it felt like one team had control of the entire game. Now, there were parts of TES that were strong and definitely could have made this interesting, but at the end of the day, I thought JDG just played a much better game as a team, and most of that was due to the phenomenal play of the mid-jungle duo here for JD Gaming. Kanavi and Yagao really showed up here in game number 3 to help JD Gaming take a huge win. Yagao's going to get my player of the game here on the Ahri. He gets gapped a little bit in game number 2. He comes back here, steals the Ahri in game number 3, and really just takes over. Is able to flip the script, completely gap Knight, quite frankly, here in game number 3 on the Ahri pick, where he's able to dominate lane phase, obviously with a lot of help from Kanavi, and then just be first to every objective and make sure everybody else's life is a living hell. He made Tion's life hell, he made Knight's life hell, and he was even really making Jackie Love have to work for his late game lead that he got. So overall, a really, really, really good game from Yagao, but you gotta give a lot of credit to Kanavi as well in this one on the Vi. Obviously, a lot of early pressure spent in the mid lane to make sure that Ahri was able to get online, which I do agree with. I think you look at something like a Gangplank matchup in the top lane, it's like, fine. You look at the Zeri Sivir handshake in the bot lane, and you've got a really, really aggressive duo of supports there in Renata and Amumu. And honestly, Jackie Love was able to get a little bit of an early lead. Mark was definitely capable of turning that around. Really not something I would have invested in either. I think Ahri for sure was the best shot here in getting your team ahead, and it very much worked. Yagao paid off in dividends here as he really carried the mid to late game here for JD Gaming. A great game from him. Again, when you're really good at Ahri, those charms are basically point and click, and Yagao couldn't miss, but he really gapped Knight in lane, mostly due to Kanavi's influence. So just a really good game overall from JDG, even if it wasn't perfect towards the back half of the game. Obviously, there were things in the game that I think they could have done a little bit better, but at the end of the day, a win is a win. They gave over a lot of objectives in order to secure kills and secure towers and secure map pressure, and it ended up working out for him, so I can't be too mad. For Top Esports, it's not a bad game. Like, I'm right in the middle on where to feel about Top Esports in this game, because it really wasn't all that awful from them. It was just a couple of players playing really bad. It was Tian and Knight just getting outplayed, which is definitely concerning because they are the focal point and the central driving factor of this entire team. And so for them to get completely outplayed in this game by Kanavi and Yagao isn't the best look. Knight's going to get my dud of the game for that reason. You put him on the Swain here, which I already don't love because I want Knight on something that's going to be significantly more proactive in the early to mid game. Swain is definitely a pick that can win you the game and can be a quote-unquote carry, but he has to do it after 20 or so minutes. He has to get items online, and he has to be able to stand in those 5v5 team fights and drain tank until he can't anymore. And by the time that we got to that point in the game, he just quite frankly wasn't strong enough to be able to do that anymore. So, not a great game from Knight. Tian certainly didn't help things. He didn't invest really at all into Knight. Obviously, you have the Renekton in the top lane, a lane that he clearly wanted to get ahead, and he did in the early game, and then he invested into the bottom lane, wanted to make sure that Zeri got online, which quite frankly wasn't an awful idea, but even then, like towards the mid game, Yagao was just completely taking over a lot of the pressure that Tian had on the Sejuani. Really, the Sej couldn't step up at all because the Ahri would completely blow him up, and Kanavi was pretty much always there to be able to assist that play anyway. So even when they were trading objectives and they were getting a couple Cloud Dragons, it never really turned into anything, and in my opinion, it never really mattered. But, like, theoretically, I guess you could say they had a shot in the back half of the game. Let's say, like, Amumu gets a miracle ult off. You have Zeri on the backline hitting. You have Renekton to follow up for CC. You have Knight, like, staying alive as long as he can. Like, there is theoretically a world in which they could have won some of these team fights, but really, I think they dug themselves a little bit too big of a hole in the jungle mid duo to be able to consistently put themselves in a position where they could win against a very good JDG team that was ahead. Like, we talk about JackeyLove having gold, like, Hope also had gold in this game. We talk about, you know, missing being a huge problem. He was more of a problem, in my opinion, than JackeyLove was. Wayward did have gold as well, and 369 wasn't really able to match that in terms of damage, but really, what's the Renekton going to do in the late game if he's the only one who's fed? So, you know, by the end of this game, it really was clear that JDG was the better team here in game number 3, mostly due, again, to Kanavi and Yagao just outplaying Knight and Tian. So, a very, very good game from JDG. What does this mean in the long run? Well, JDG is now up 2-1 in this series, which is a very good thing for them. Obviously, only needing to win one more game in this series puts them in a much more comfortable position. Obviously, they're not going to want to lose Game 4, but they can at least afford to lose Game 4, something that Top Esports no longer has the luxury to do. And so, we are looking at a series now where it's win or go home in both of the last 2 games for Top Esports. Game 4 is going to be the first of those 2. Can JDG close it out in 4 games, or is this going to be sent to a Silver Scrapes game number 5, just like it was in Winners Finals? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Top Esports. We do send this series here to a game number 5 with a big game 4 win from TES. And man, like, this was another really, really good game, and honestly, this was the cleanest game, I would say. Like, from top to bottom, the cleanest game so far of this series. A beautiful game from Top Esports. They gave up a few dragons in the beginning of the game, but they really capitalized on giving those up in order to create lane advantages around the map, and honestly, every single lane for Top Esports won in this game, really with jungle intervention and without jungle intervention. It was just a very, very good game. Player of the game for me, honestly, it was between a couple of people. For me, it was between Tian and JackeyLove. Those were the 2 that I was very much on the fence with. Mark also played a really good game, but Tian or JackeyLove, I ended up giving it to Tian in the jungle. He was really, really solid. He was able to set up so much in the mid game in order for JackeyLove to just be able to take over a lot of these team fights on the Zeri pick, something that obviously we've seen him play in this series already, but honestly, JackeyLove really hasn't been all that good in this series up till this point. He's been fine, but really hasn't been that takeover player that he's been in the playoffs up till this point. Certainly not the guy who outplayed Viper in the series before this. So, you're kind of waiting for JackeyLove to hit that online moment, and Tian plays much better here in game number 4, gives JackeyLove a ton more opportunities to be that guy here for Top Esports, and he takes advantage of it. Honestly, even though, like I said, they don't get this quote-unquote early game objective lead, they're still always rocking in terms of pressure. They're still always rocking in terms of gold pretty much throughout this entire game. A lot of that can be accredited to Tian, but obviously JackeyLove did a great job of taking that gold and making use of it throughout the game. So yeah, a really, really solid, I would say consistently great game from Top Esports. Wayward won his lane. Obviously going into Renekton can be a little bit difficult for the Gnar. Typically, at least Gnar mostly just has to play safe in that lane, but Wayward did a really good job of making sure that Renekton didn't have, you know, as much, I don't know, pressure as he would normally like to have to be able to roam with someone like a Pantheon, to be able to make plays across the map and things like that. I think Kanavi did a poor job of translating his pressure, but we'll get to that. I think Wayward did a really good job of making sure that wasn't a problem. And like I said, I think Mark was honestly really underrated in terms of how he played, not only in this game, but in this series as a whole so far. He's been really, really good, and he was really good on the Renata in this game. Obviously, we got a little supportal combat towards the back half of the game, and that's always fun, but at the end of the day, he did a really good job of enabling JackeyLove being able to move with Tian and being able to make plays across the map. Really just set Top Esports up for a really good scenario. Knight was just the support player of this game, which is kind of a luxury that a lot of teams wish they could have. I mean, imagine having one of the best players in the entire world, and you can just stick him on Lissandra and say, like, you're going to be the player that's supporting everyone else this game, and you can still win because you have Tian, you have JackeyLove, you have Wayward. Like, it's actually absurd, the depth of talent that this team has at its disposal. So, very good game, I think, overall from Top Esports, and they're going to be happy, obviously, to win this, but very, very happy to keep their LPL playoff, LPL championship dreams alive here. But as for JDG, this was not a good game. This was probably the worst game that any team has had in this series so far. They just got outplayed, and it really wasn't all that close. My dud of the game is going to be Kanavi here in the jungle. He's had a very good series overall, but, you know, one bad game here. It happens. He pulls out the Pantheon, definitely wants to go for that more early game aggression style, wants to try and fight, wants to try and duel, wants to try and make sure that his lanes can get ahead, similarly to how he played the game 3. They pull out the Ahri again, and I imagine they had in mind that they wanted to play through mid lane again, but The Lissandra comes out for Knight, obviously something a lot less proactive for him to be able to play on, but at the same time something that he's going to be significantly better on in terms of the 1v1 matchup in the mid lane, and then also a lot better to avoid Pantheon ganks, because really, if Lissandra's out, there's absolutely nothing that Pantheon can do to stop that. So he reinvests into the top lane, and Wayward and Tian play it really, really well. Obviously, 369 really isn't able to get anything on this Renekton and ends up becoming entirely useless, and Kanavi really falls behind because of it too. Hope does end up getting a little bit of a lead, is able to pick up some kills here or there on Tian, one on Jackie Love, a couple on Knight, one on Mark. Like, he's able to pick up a few things here and there, but outside of that, like, they have absolutely no gold and no damage. Kanavi does his best to try and trade objectives for towers and for lane pressure, but by the end of the game, the gold lead is just way too out of hand, and Kanavi had such a bad early game on a champion that really needs that early game in order to translate at all to any other part of the game that it really wasn't salvageable at that point. Not the worst loss in the world, even though Kanavi played bad. Like, I still don't think it's entirely, like, panic button his fault. Like, when you pick a Pantheon game, if it doesn't work in the early game, you're just gonna lose, and that happens. Like, you can't guarantee a win in the early game, even if you play perfectly, which obviously Kanavi did not, but even if you did theoretically play perfectly, you can't guarantee that the rest of your lanes are going to go great. You can't even guarantee that all the plays you're going to be making are worth it, and then the other team might just scale into the late game anyways, so, you know, there's really just not a lot of guarantees with something like a Pantheon, and when it goes wrong, and unfortunately, in this game, for JDG and for Kanavi, it went wrong. Yagao certainly didn't have nearly as good of a game on the Ahri here in game number 4, but obviously, the matchup into Lissandra is significantly worse. Lissandra's considered a counterpick to Ahri for a reason, because she really just shuts down the 1v1. Like, Lissandra doesn't really do all that much outside of that, but really just shuts down the 1v1, makes that mid lane significantly more safe for Knight, and that allows someone like Jackie Love and someone like Wayward to play more aggressive because they can afford to have more help from their jungler, because Knight, quite frankly, just doesn't need it here in the mid lane. And then, Hope, while he did play well, like, Hope and Missing, I think, definitely generated a good amount of leads. Obviously, Missing winning the supportal combat towards the back half of the game. It just didn't matter. Like, at that point, like, Kanavi and 369 were so far behind, and you had gold on Jackie Love, like, significantly more gold. So, even if the Sivir was doing, like, okay damage, like, she was never going to be able to survive a fight against the Zeri, or against the Gnar, or against the Trundle, or anything like that. So, the game was pretty much over by the mid-game for JDG, and that's a little unfortunate, but what that means is we get to move into a game number 5. We've had 2 series between these two teams in the playoffs. Both have gone to 5 games. We were getting 10 playoff games between Top Esports and JD Gaming, and I don't think I could possibly ask for more. It's really the dream scenario, and these two teams really are evenly matched as can be, and so what ended up happening in game number 5? Obviously, the winner wins the LPL title. You can't ask for more stakes. The LPL championship on the line. The 2 best teams in the region that have proved over and over again that they are as evenly matched as you could possibly come. So, who ended up winning the LPL finals? Well, the winner of game number 5 was JD Gaming. They finally do it. They finally exercise their demons and win the 2022 LPL Summer Championship. Wow, that is amazing. They are going to Worlds as the number 1 seed, but before we get into talk about Worlds, let's go ahead and talk about how this game number 5 went. Whew, I mean, TES is definitely going to be feeling it a little bit here. They had a very good early game. Honestly, they put themselves in a pretty good spot at the beginning. Tian did a great job of making sure that Knight had a significant amount of gold. He pulls out the Victor in this game, I should know. Control Mage that really isn't all that popular right now, obviously. Of all the control mages, it's really just been him and Orianna that have really seen any play at all in any region in the world, but Victor has really been phased almost completely out of the meta here. Knight pulls him out in the pivotal game number 5 here and actually gets a really good lead on the Azir, a matchup that Victor has always historically been very good in. It's actually a really, really good pick here, in my opinion, and Knight definitely gets the gold to be able to set him up in a good spot, but man, JDG is just like the perfect mid-game team. Like, I can't think of a better team in the mid-game than JD Gaming in the world. Like, they're so consistent, whether from ahead, whether from behind, to be able to make good macro calls, to be able to put themselves in a good spot. And even when they're on champions that I don't think generally have the best time in the mid-game, things like the Bel'Veth, things like the Azir, I don't necessarily think this is a very good draft from JD Gaming. You're indexing very, very heavily into those late-game team fights, and very much putting yourself in a spot where if TES does get that early lead and really can compound it in the mid-game, I don't really see how you come back from a game like that. But honestly, like, Oh, like, they played the mid game so perfectly. Hope was able to get completely online, and he positioned, like, so beautifully in the back half of this game. Like, Sivir could never actually be touched, whether or not, like, they tried, and trust me, they absolutely tried to get on Hope here. Whether it was Wayward going full in with ultimate, whether it was Mark trying to flank with Q. There were so many times that TES's only goal was to get onto that Sivir, and Hope's positioning in those back half of those team fights was basically perfect. Missing did a great job of keeping him alive as well. Gotta give a ton of credit to him. And then 369 did a ton to disrupt the backline during a lot of those late game team fights, and so really, really good job just overall by JDG, getting themselves into a little bit of a hole, but using their basically perfect macro that they had here in game number 5 to dig themselves out of the hole, put themselves in a position where they have the Azir, they have the Sivir, hell, they even have the Bel'Veth, Aatrox, in order to just dominate a lot of these 5v5 team fights, and Hope played it beautifully. He's going to get my player of the game here in game number 5. I can't even believe it. Going from not having a starting spot in the LPL in spring to player of the game in game 5 of the LPL finals is a pretty good career track for Hope, and now he's going on to Worlds. You gotta be excited for the former EDG youngster that finally found a home here on JDG and really, really made use of it. This team got so much better when Hope got subbed in earlier in the year. It really unlocked what a lot of this team wanted to do because his late game prowess really was a huge upgrade to what this team was able to accomplish. Add to that Kanavi and Yagao really being one of the best jungle mid duos in the world. Yagao being one of the most underrated players in the world. I imagine people who watch my channel are incredibly tired of hearing me talk about that, but it's been so true all year long, and it continues to be true now that he's won the LPL trophy. And then Missing was phenomenal in the playoffs, and in this series in particular. He was just so great at making sure that everybody on this team was always in a position to be able to capitalize in the exact way that they needed to, and the exact way that was best for the team. Honestly, a perfect game from JDG, minus the early game, but a perfect, 15 minutes onward from JDG, and they are very, very, very worth holding up that LPL trophy. A perfect end to what a phenomenal split, and honestly, the team that deserved it the most ended up winning it in the end. As for Top Esports, it's heartbreaking because you did start out this game really, really well. Knight had gold, and unfortunately, it's just not the meta where a champion like Victor can actually carry the game. You need a lot of help from your jungler, and you need especially help from your bot laner here, and your bot laner is on the Zeri. You have the Sivir Zeri handshake here, and Jackie Love runs it. He has another really bad game, just like he did in game 1. A lot of mispositioning errors, times in the late game where if he doesn't get caught out, there's a very good chance Top Esports has at least a decent chance to be able to win fights like this, especially seeing how their team fighting has been over the course of the playoffs. They might be the best team fighting team in the world, but when Jackie Love, quite frankly, just ints away game number 5, it's very difficult. He's clearly the dud of the game, and I talked about this. Sometimes you get the best AD carry in the world, and sometimes you get, one that's going to actively lose you games. Unfortunately here, when it mattered the most, in game number 5 of the LPL finals, Jackie Love completely threw away Top Esports' chances at winning, and it's definitely unfortunate. Now, it's not only his fault. Obviously, the mid game from JDG was really good, but you gotta be more active if you are Tion. He was someone who I was really starting to praise towards the back half of the playoffs. Started playoffs really slow. The series with EDG, and honestly, the first series with JD Gaming were a little bit not great, and then he comes back, he destroys JJ in the EDG series. He plays a lot better here, even if Kanavi's playing well. I don't think Tion was playing all that bad in this series, but again, goes back to his more passive, supportive roots here in game number 5, and is really just not aggressive enough to be able to compound the lead that they were able to generate in the early game on that Victor, and you end up in this point in the game where they just don't have enough gold into a matchup that is not favorable in the back half of the game, and you end up losing it. Obviously, Jackie Love not running it down would have given them at least a chance to be able to win the game, but you had other opportunities. It wasn't just one player that was throwing this series, so what does it mean overall for these two teams? Well, both of them are going to Worlds. Obviously, JDG is the 1 seed, Top Esports as the 2 seed. Being the 1 seed's always a better predicament because you don't want to be the team that, if you're Top Esports, theoretically, you could get into a group with Gen G, and that's just not preferable. You don't want to be in a situation where you're going to have to play Gen G. That is just not where you want to be, but, outside of that, both of these teams look really, really good, and both of these teams are genuine favorites to win the World Championships. Neither are going to have to go through the regional qualifiers, which is good. Top Esports, in the end, a feast or famine team, mostly because of Jackie Love and Mark, but at the end of the day, a team that definitely has the talent and the potential to beat anyone in the world, including this JDG team. They played 10 games in the playoffs. They both went to 5. Clearly, this top esports team is at least remotely on the JDG team level, but neither time could they actually pull it out in the game 5 when it mattered the most. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see if they can change their fortunes come Worlds time. But for JD Gaming, you got to be excited for this organization. You got to be excited for this team. And honestly, it's just phenomenal. So let's give a big round of applause and a big congratulations to our 2022 Summer Split LPL champion, JD Gaming team. This team went from, having me predicting them to go 9th, I believe, in my spring preseason prediction rankings, to summer champions. And really, it was everybody on this team. It was 369, arguably being the best top laner in the LPL all year long. He really dominated. What a career resurgence from him, and a great year. Kanavi, really someone who I think almost gets underrated in the grand scheme of things. He is one of the best junglers in the world, and I'm glad he got a chance to prove that against the MVP here in Tian over and over again in 2 separate series. You've got Yagao, maybe the most underrated player in the world, like I said, but someone who has really, really stepped up, maybe had the single best year of his entire career here, and he's going to be heading to Worlds for a chance at redemption from the narrative that's kind of been built around him for his career as a player who's good but not great. Then you have Hope, someone who has completely unlocked this JDG team along with Missing. They've really become one of the most consistent and influential bot lanes in the LPL, something that nobody could have predicted at the beginning of the year. Hope didn't even have an LPL team at the beginning of the year, and now he is sitting here as an LPL champion. That is phenomenal. And then Missing, obviously stepping up. The remains of WE, the ashes are spread here on JDG. He had a phenomenal year, almost an underrated year maybe by me in the long run. Really been an incredibly consistent piece and a huge reason why JDG is here in the first place. All 5 members of this team stepped up and really proved that they deserved to be here and that they deserved to hoist that trophy. I am so excited to see not only what this team can do at Worlds, but hopefully they can keep this core together and see what they can do for a long time now, because this is a phenomenal team that is just so fun to watch, and I can't give anything but a congratulations to them. All right, but with our finals review now done and dusted, the overview and analysis has been completed. It is now time to preview the LPL 2022 Regional Qualifier. So, of course, the 2 teams that we talked about today, JD Gaming going as the 1 seed, Top Esports going as the 2 seed to Worlds. We need to lock in our 3 seed and our 4 seed at Worlds. Now, LPL has had this format for quite a while. LCK adopted the format, so if you watched my LCK finals video, it's the same regional qualifier format that LCK is now doing. You have the 3 and the 4 seed playoff in the first game of the regional qualifier. The winner of that game will then go on to Worlds as the number 3 seed from the LPL. The loser will move on to, quote-unquote, the finals. Then in the second game, you have the 5 and the 6 seed play against each other. The winner of that will play the loser of the first game, and then the winner of that one will go to Worlds as the 4 seed. So, definitely an interesting format that, honestly, I think allows for a little bit of experimentation from the top seeds, in this case being RNG and EDG. I should note that the seeding, not based on playoff, but based on championship points. So, obviously, spring has championship points, summer has championship points. The combined amount of those championship points will give you your 3, 4, 5, and 6. They happen to be the top 6 teams from summer, but that's because summer is kind of inflated in terms of championship points. But overall, still a really interesting kind of dynamic. LNG finishing the regular season or finishing the summer split in 4th, falling down to 6th. RNG finishing it, 5, 6, and moves up to 3rd just because they won spring. So definitely a little bit of reseeding problems, but we're going to go game by game. I'm going to talk about how I think the matchup might go, give my predictions for it, and at the end, you all can tell me how wrong you think I am. So let's go ahead and start off with our 3-4 matchup here between Royal Never Give Up, RNG, and Edward Gaming. Now, we actually saw this matchup in playoffs. They faced each other for a shot to get into the top 4, and EDG was able to win that series. In 5 games, it was very close. Even back then, I thought EDG had a little bit of the advantage in the series, but still a very, very close series that I think could be pretty back and forth, and that's because I think these 2 teams both have definite weaknesses and definite strengths. I think really the standout matchup, as we're all going to go to, is going to be Gala versus Viper, 2 of the most mechanically talented AD carries in the region, arguably 2 of the top 3 AD carries in the region here, and It's been really fun to watch both of these guys play. Viper definitely got the upper hand on Gala in the last time that they played, and I think that could potentially be something that could happen again, although, you know, putting someone like Ming in there and you know, versus Mako, two of the most historic supports in LPL history, definitely could create a lot of interesting functions, and honestly, if the bot lane goes one way or the other, I'm really not going to be surprised either way. You have the mid lane matchup here between Xiaohu and Scout that, honestly, a very different player. Xiaohu's someone who likes a little bit more of the resources. Scout, not so much, or at least they've kind of gone away from that in terms of the success. You have the jungle matchup here between Wei and JJ that I think is very interesting as well. And then, of course, Breathe versus Flandre in the top lane. Definitely probably the least interesting matchup of them all. So where exactly do I land on these two teams? Well, I think definitely it's going to come down to, in my opinion, the jungle versus the bot lane, right? Like, it's going to be if JJ or Wei can get a huge advantage on the other, that team's going to be set up in a good spot to be able to enable their bot lane to get a lead and be able to scale the game from there. But obviously, both teams have the potential to do that, and both teams do that strategy very, very well. So which one do I think is going to be doing it more consistently? Well, in this series, I am going to go with an EDG win. I know it's a little bit, you know, predictable, but I honestly think EDG is just the better team, in my opinion. RNG definitely showed a lot of flaws throughout the regular season, and definitely not something that it felt like they improved on in their series in the playoffs. Obviously, they only had one series. They've had a ton of time to be ready and to start scouting for EDG as their opponent, and so potentially they could pull out some really cool stuff here. They could be very ready, but you know, EDG, I think, really surprised a lot of people with how good they were in the playoffs, and it really felt like everything started to click for a team that should be a top 2 or 3 team in the region. So I'm going to expect that to continue. I'm going to say that EDG should win this in 4 or 5 games, but if RNG won it in 5, I really wouldn't be all that surprised either. But I'm going to have EDG winning, which means RNG moves on to the final game, and EDG goes to Worlds as the number 3 seed in the LPL. But moving on to our other regional qualifier game, our 5-6 matchup between Victory 5 and LNG Esports. Another really interesting one that we did see in the playoffs, and LNG was actually able to take this in a relatively clean fashion, mostly due to the fact that Ale really abused Rich in the top lane. Now, Rich is someone I was very concerned about for Victory 5. We know that Rich is a very good team fighter. He's been one of the best team fighters in the region, especially in the top lane, for quite a long time, pretty much the entire year now, but the problem with Rich has always been his consistency in laning phase, and Ale certainly is a player that is willing to take picks that are able to take advantage of that. The Fiora, the Jax, hell, even something like the Gnar can really punish a lot of the mistakes that Rich is making if he's not on something ridiculously safe. So that's potentially something in favor of LNG, but also in that series, LNG really stepped up. Tarzan and Doanby really showed up to play, and they're kind of the duo that really determines LNG's fate when it comes to a lot of this, because when they're on, they're a very good team that's very difficult to beat, but when they're not all that good. And then for Victory 5, for a similar, you know, kind of thing, you have Photic in the bottom lane, who, when he is very good, he is very good. His positioning can be great, but he has shown multiple times now to choke in high-pressure scenarios, and I really just don't know if I can count on him to be the guy to be able to win this series for Victory 5. And really, at the end of the day, Photic is going to have to step up and be that guy that helps Rookie, that helps PP God to be able to push Victory 5 over the finish line, just as players like Tarzan and Doanby are going to have to do that to help out Light and to help out Ale. So, who do I think has the advantage in this matchup? Well, obviously, LNG took it the first time, but I have Victory 5 taking it the second time. I think they should theoretically be the better team here. They should have learned from the mistakes that they made in that series, hopefully putting Rich on someone significantly more safe in the top lane and not really asking too much of him, and then being sure to heavily invest into that bottom lane. If if Tarzan and Doanby are going to be playing aggressive in that mid, jungle duo, and you're not going to be putting a lot of resources towards Light, then make sure that Photic can get that lead, because Rookie is going to be fine in the late game. I have faith for that. Zhao Bao, while he's not the most experienced player, not the most... Karsa would be someone that I think a lot of people want to see here. Zhao Bao is probably going to be playing here, and while I don't think he's necessarily the biggest positive in favor of Victory 5, he is someone who can carry the game, and honestly has a decently okay matchup into Tarzan if things go right for Victory 5. So I see this being a close series, but I think V5 should be able to take it in 4 or 5 games. If LNG was to win, I wouldn't be too shocked, obviously, because they've already done it, but I think Victory 5 should have been able to learn from that series and should be able to move on to the 4th qualifying game here between RNG and Victory 5. Now, this is an incredibly intriguing matchup. I think This is a matchup of two teams that at one point you could have made a real case for the best team in the region, but over the course of the last few weeks have really had their stocks dip and dip and dip to the point now where they're both going to have to fight for that last spot at the World Championship. So, where do I think the advantages and disadvantages lie? Well, like I said, V5 is really a team that needs to be able to get Photic online. A lot of that is done through Rookie and Jiaolan Bao, making sure that the bot lane is being heavily invested in, but RNG is a team, like, their bot lane is so hyper consistent, and it's very difficult for me to imagine a world where that bot lane is going to be able to where Photic is going to consistently be able to get ahead against someone like Gala, who, in my opinion, is just a better version of Photic. And, you know, the Xiaohu versus Rookie, you know, matchup is always fun to watch, especially with the world spot on the line, but, you know, the matchup of, like, Wei versus Jiaolan Bao, I think, is definitely Wei favored. And, honestly, in the top lane, you're looking at Breathe versus Rich. Breathe is someone who can take advantage of Rich's weaknesses. I see RNG being able to win this series pretty easily, at least in my opinion. I do think it will be close, like, Victory 5 could take a game, but I could see this going for, like, 3, 4, or 5 games in favor of RNG. I would say this is probably the least close of the 3 matchups that we've discussed in the regional qualifiers so far. RNG should have the easiest time of being able to beat Victory 5, and they should be able to destroy LNG, in my opinion. They have an even better matchup against them, so I would expect an even less close game against LNG. But RNG, in my opinion, if I had to guess, is going to be the 4th and final team to move on to the World Championships. As our spring reps, obviously, I imagine they hoped for more, but that's what I've got for my LPL regional qualifier predictions. Let me know down in the comment section below how you guys feel about these predictions. Do you see EDG going as the 3 seed? Do you see RNG going as the 4 seed? Or do you think Victory 5 or LNG could be the team that ends up surprising people and making the World Championships this year? Let me know down in the comment section below. And then obviously, leave a like if you really did like this video. It really helps out the channel a lot. Obviously, we put a lot of effort into talking about these videos. We've been putting out a video every single day for basically 3 weeks now, talking about playoff content. I can't even imagine the amount of hours of content that I've put out over the past few weeks. So if you guys are enjoying it, I highly recommend you leave a like just to let me know that you guys are enjoying it. And if you want to see more of what I do, obviously I've been posting every single day and I'm going to continue to do that up until there's no content left to post. Hey, go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you want to see all that. Hit the bell so you know when those videos are coming out. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.